Good evening. I want to welcome you to this evening's presentation called The Great Debate Over 12-Step Programs. I want to begin this evening by telling you that I don't take this conversation lightly. This is deeply meaningful and deeply personal, I think, for all of us. And it's part of the reason that we've come together to have this inquiry, to be a part of this inquiry together. I'd like to ask everybody, I'd like to invite you. I'd like to invite you into an attitude, a way of being for our time together this evening. And that attitude is an attitude of presence, consideration, kindness, open-minded, open-hearted, that we recognize right off the bat that we're discussing something that has a lot of opinions, a great deal of emotion, and a great deal of difficulty for people as well around this topic of the effectiveness or lack of effectiveness of 12-step programs. There's tremendous emotion for people. A lot of attachment, a lot of pain. And as a result, there's a lot of violence. There's a lot of violence around it. Internal violence, verbal violence, emotional violence, and unsettled nature to this thing for a lot of people. So I wanted to begin by asking you all if we could agree on being in open-minded and open-heartedness together. And I'd like to ask if you would say yes, if you agree with that in the chat bar here, so I can just make sure we're all on the same page before we even get into this. Okay, so far everybody's a yes? Yes and always, I love that. Okay, thank you guys. So we've got over 200 people in the room, and that is a great number of people for us to, all be together. Thank you so much for responding positively to this. Okay, so let's jump in. Everybody in this room, and I think everyone in general, on the inside, is interested in truthfulness. I think generally speaking, we are interested in truthfulness. If we're on this path of healing, a path of moving toward unity, moving away from division, away from separateness, I think that we're interested in the truth. No matter what path you're on, no matter what your belief system, your philosophy, if you're interested in healing, if you're interested in living better, if you're interested in doing better, if you're interested in excellence, if you're interested in approaching life in a more skillful manner, honesty, especially self-honesty, is going to be important. Do you guys agree with that? That self-honesty is important for all of us, no matter what we've chosen in terms of our recovery path. It's essential, is what I'm hearing from you guys, definitely. Okay. All right, so there are people in this room who have had positive experiences with the 12 steps. There are people in this room who have had negative experiences with the 12 steps. There are people in this room who have had positive experiences with people involved in 12-step programs. And there are people in this room who have had negative experiences with people involved in 12-step programs. That's really, really important to begin there. On the one hand, we all agree that we're looking for truthfulness, that we think it's important collectively that we develop the capacity for self-honesty. Most of us in the room have experienced addiction in one form or another. That means at one point we found ourselves making choices that were hurtful and repeating those choices, even in the face of the evidence that we were hurting ourselves. So we share so much. We share so much in this room, no matter what your position is with regards to the 12 steps. The main purpose of this presentation this evening is clarity, is to bring about a greater sense of clarity, inclusivity, togetherness. It's not togetherness around the 12 steps or not around the 12 steps. It's just togetherness, period. Okay, so I'm going to come at it like this. I came into recovery in the way that I came into recovery. That was initially through a treatment center. When I was at the treatment center, they adopted the 12 steps. And so they presented the 12 steps to me as a possibility. I'm not giving you my opinion. I'm giving you what happened. I was asked to read out of the book. I was asked to write certain exercises. I was asked to share my personal experience with, mostly with addiction, what I had come through in terms of drugs and alcohol. I was asked to share about my personal life, every area of my life in treatment. That's what part of the process of my initial movement towards self-honesty happened there. What they were doing was they were having me, number one, separate me from drugs and alcohol. So I'm sober with each successive day, another day, and sleep and eat and do the fundamentals of life, which I hadn't been doing for a very long time. And then come together in group, come together one-on-one, sit in meetings, circle up in 12-step meetings, and read out of the book and do the assignments from the book. There were also, by extension, there were some psychologically based processes that they were putting me through as well. All of it was geared towards helping me. I was somebody who had hurt myself very badly, and I seemed for a period of time to lose the ability to make a good choice. I was just making bad choices. I kept hurting myself. I wanted to change, but I didn't know how to do it. So that's what happened. I didn't have, when I left treatment, I didn't have a level of maturity or clarity or an understanding of recovery. For me, I remember at the time, I was a young man, I was 22, and I just wanted to get back to my life. I wanted to get back to my life. You see, I wasn't thinking about moving forward in terms of deeper level of healing, detoxification of the mind, body, of the cells of my body and of the emotions stuck in my body. I wasn't thinking about, adopting a set of principles and then trying to live up to those principles. I was just thinking, I really want to get back to my life before I was hurting myself so badly. I'm not such a bad guy. I was enjoying my life before. Can't I enjoy my life again? That was as far as I kind of got, And so I floated. I just floated through life for a while. I didn't have much of a program. I was going to meetings, 12-step meetings. I was going there, but I wasn't really thinking much about it. It wasn't it wasn't a central focus of my life, if you will. And I certainly wasn't dedicated to it in any kind of way or devoted to it in any kind of way. I just kind of floated through my life without much of any process at all that was going to lead me to greater and greater understanding of myself and a greater connection to truthfulness, especially my ability to be honest. What ended up happening for me was after about a year of that, I went back to using drugs and alcohol. And another year after that, I was using drugs and alcohol for most of that year. And then I came to an interesting place in my life. I came to a place where I wasn't beaten down the same way I had been before I went into treatment. I wasn't beaten down. But inside, there was a terrible thought there. There was a very, very painful and terrible thought that I didn't like to look at. It was what I call the sobering thought. And that thought was, I'm never going to find out what I could be. I'm never going to find out what my life could have been if I had put down drugs and alcohol, because I just don't seem to be able to stop or to be able to have a life that doesn't involve drugs and alcohol. And I could see clearly at that point in my life that drugs and alcohol were like an enormous limiting factor in my life on what was possible. I couldn't really complete things. I had no motivation. My confidence was really low. My self-esteem was really low because everything that I set out to do creatively, I really just blew off because I just didn't have what it seemed to take to live a good life and to be free. And so I went to the place that I knew to go to. It was the place I knew to go to because that's all I had been shown. And that was a 12-step meeting. And I went there, and there's a famous story about that. It's famous to me, about how I met a loving man who reached out to me and helped me get through my first couple of months, getting sober again. And from meeting that man until this moment now, 28 and a half years, I've been sober. No drugs, no alcohol. Now, some of you might think, oh my God, I didn't sign on to this, to hear this guy talking about how great the 12 steps were in his life. That's not what I'm telling you. I'm not giving you any opinion. I'm only telling you what happened. But I've also spent the last 28 years taking a good look, a good, honest, and grounded look at the 12 steps, at almost every other major path of recovery, from smart recovery, refuge recovery, celebrate recovery, psychological approaches, atheistic approaches, agnostic approaches, spiritual approaches, yogic approaches, meditation approaches, nutritional approaches. I have looked at addiction and I have looked at recovery from just about every angle possible. And over that 28 years, there was always one thing that in 28 years, even at the beginning, I understood one thing for sure. This I knew, that on this earth, on this planet, in this time, in this day and age, if there was any one thing I knew, it's that any two people or group of people or anyone who has ever struggled with and overcome addiction should never, ever argue with each other. I knew it then and I know it now, that there was no room for argument in this space. And I'm going to unpack that for you. So what happened for me is the 12 steps in writing and reading and going through the process of a personal inventory, which is a very powerful thing. I think everybody should do it, not necessarily in the 12 steps, but I think everybody should, in the spirit of self-honesty and the spirit of learning about ourselves. I think it's very powerful for a guide to help us see ourselves more deeply. That guide would be called a teacher. I think it's such a blessing whenever any of us find a teacher. And if we could find an honest and an open and a loving and a caring teacher, what an asset for our life. I happen to find a couple of those within the 12-step universe. So I was fortunate to find some wonderful teachers there, and they guided me, and I did what they told me to do. And over time, my mind changed. My mind changed in the following way. I went from a person who used to rely upon and think about doing drugs all the time. If I wasn't doing drugs, I was at least thinking about doing drugs. So there was an obsessiveness and a compulsiveness to it. I went from that person to a person who no longer even thought about doing drugs. Now that's a massive shift. Notice I haven't mentioned God. I haven't really mentioned spirituality. I'm just saying that as I went through the work and did that process, it brought about a change in me. Now that's just not my opinion. I'm just telling you what happened for me. I have no opinion, literally no opinion about you and what you ought to be doing. And I don't like to share or tell anybody what they ought to do ever. But if somebody comes to me and they say, could you help guide me? Would you share your experience with me because I'm stuck and I'm needing some guidance? That's different. Once somebody asks for that kind of help, then I do feel like I can share and I can provide whatever loving advice or share my experience in any way that I feel would be helpful to that person. But short of anybody asking me directly for help, like the way that I happen to find freedom from addiction is none of anybody's business. And the way that you found freedom from addiction is none of my business. Unless we're in a forum where we share together in an open-hearted and an open-minded kind of way. Now, on the note of finding a teacher, you can find teachers anywhere. Teachers are people who are wise, who are working on their mind, who are working on the challenges of life consciously. They have a teaching that they follow or have followed. That's why they're teachers. And they've grown in their intellectual capacity, and they've grown in their consciousness to be able to help someone who hasn't yet grown to that same place. And they don't push upon anybody a teaching or a belief system. They are just there as a kind and wise presence that someone could tap into if they're interested in hearing from that person. So I found a few of those people and I put myself around them, and lo and behold, I started to get better. My own intellectual capacity started to heal and grow. My own consciousness started to grow. And my mind changed, as I said. Now, there are people in the world who have had positive experiences like me with the 12 steps, which is fine, which is a blessing and a wonderful thing. But there are so many people in the world who have had positive experiences that have helped them move beyond addiction with other programs or other approaches. Now, this is my opinion. My opinion is, or my feeling is I'm super interested in that. I'm excited for people. When they overcome addiction by whatever means necessary, that excites the crap out of me. I'm like, wow, tell me how you did it. What did you do? Tell me, what was the thing? Like, oh my God, how did you face this? How did you overcome that? Did you have a community to help you? Was it just one-on-one with a therapist? Did you maybe do some personal private work where you were writing and reflecting and meditating and contemplating? Was nutrition a part of what you did? Maybe you had yoga or athletics or some kind of martial art was part of your approach. Tell me what you did, because if there's anything I know, this addiction is so formidable. And as we all know, it can not just kill you, but it'll ruin your life first. And then it'll kill you. Like it's serious business, right? So anybody who by any means has gotten over their addiction, I immediately feel a kindredness with them. Now, there are many people who have had very negative experiences with the 12 steps. And anyone who's had a positive experience about the 12 steps has taken note of those people when they express themselves, or people who have had negative experiences with the 12 steps have taken note of the people who have had positive experiences when they express themselves. Now, I'm guessing that nobody in the room here would be upset because of my experience, that I happened to go through the 12 steps. That's what I was turned on to in treatment. It was positive for me. I'm not pushing it on you or anybody. I'm just reporting in from the field. I'm guessing nobody here would be upset about that. It's just an experience, that's all. But if I told you my experience is the experience, it's the one experience, this is the way you get sober. If I told you, you got to do it this way, you got to follow the way I did it, otherwise you might die. You need to believe like I believe. And if you don't believe like I believe, then you might not make it. Now, what do we call that? Anybody got a word for that? It starts with a D, it ends with an A, it's got 2 syllables. Dogma. Let me ask you guys a question. Let's take a poll in the room right now. Especially this group of people right here. This group of people in the room right here. Do you guys like to be told what to do? Raise your hand. Anybody, yes? Anybody here like to be told what to do? I've got 300 people in the room right now, all of whom are like, fuck no. Right. We don't like being told what to do. How about we'll take another poll in the room. Anybody here like to be told what to believe? How about that? You should believe this. You like that? I'm seeing brrr, no, 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 no. Right. We do not like to be told what to do. We do not like to be told what to believe. Here is the most important, in my opinion, the most important thing to take away. Any teacher is going to give you space to connect with your own experience, your own direct experience. A teacher will give you space to create your own process of becoming, your own process of healing. They're going to give you space to base your beliefs upon your direct experience. You're going to be given the space to look at your own life, to inquire within yourself. You'll be guided in that way. So a teacher can really help guide you to understand more clearly what's going on with me. What are my patterns? How can I move out of discomfort into ease? Or how can I move out of this pain into joy? How can I move from addiction and addictive behaviors into better choices and a more skillful way of living? That's a real teacher. That's a real sponsor. That's a real guide and mentor. Anybody who tells you this is what you should believe in, how you should believe it, I mean, I just run the other way. I just run the other way. But this is the thing. In the 12-step world, in the universe, now you non-12 steppers, please hear this, hear this. In the 12-step world, I have personally seen really beautiful, grounded, and wise presentations of those teachings. I have also seen mediocre, maybe not so wise presentations of those teachings. And I have seen awful, dogmatic, unwise presentations of those teachings. And so you see, it really depends on the presentation of the material to you, how it comes to you, the the delivery, the way the person who's presenting that information to you, the way that they're creating an access point for you to understand. Now, again, the 12 steps are not for everybody. Nothing is for everybody. That's why we have so many wonderful choices. Where does the great debate come from? Well, I guess what happens is someone like me who's had a positive experience hears from somebody who had a negative experience. And if we're really attached to our experience and we're really gripping onto our experience has to be the experience and it has to be the right experience. And this person is like, no, my experience, which was negative, this is the way, and the system doesn't work. And don't you see that? Those two people are in conflict and they're never going to see eye to eye within the context of their attachment. The release of the attachment, it sounds something like, I can see, as a person who has had positive experiences with the 12 steps, I can so see and understand how someone else has had negative experiences. I can so see that that person feels negatively, and I can even understand that my positivity about the 12 steps could be a trigger to that person if they're attached to their negativity about the 12 steps. Do you understand what I'm saying? Does this make sense to you? Yes? So the point is if anyone is gripped onto their position, then there's no open-mindedness and there's no open-heartedness. And how can we actually get to the matter at hand? And what is the matter at hand? The matter at hand is helping each other by whatever path, whatever right message, delivered with kindness and love, to move beyond the stuckness that we're feeling at any given moment. Everybody in this room, I think everybody in this room wants everybody else actually to succeed. I don't think there's anybody here that like wants, oh, you're not into the 12 steps, I hope you get yours. I mean, that's just ridiculous. I don't think that we're that way. I think what we are is a loving group of people, many of whom have experienced great trauma, many of whom have traumatized ourselves further through addiction, many of whom found recovery, hopefully, by this means, this path, or that path, whatever it is. And then what happens is we get down the road a little bit and we some of us feel, well, this is the way, or this is what I'm seeing as the way, or somebody told us this is the only way, and that's dogma. There is no the only way. There is truthfulness and there is untruthfulness. There is consciousness and there is unconsciousness. There is skillful behavior and unskillful behavior. We can all agree that it's helpful to have support. Yeah, I mean, we can all agree on that. It's helpful to have support when you're getting sober. It's helpful to have support along your path of recovery, whatever that is for you. It's helpful to have something to follow, some kind of teaching. It's helpful to have a teacher. And by the way, your teachers will change over time. We all seem to need some kind of mechanism by which we heal. And by healing, we really get to move towards unity, consciousness, togetherness. We get to move toward truthfulness. We're able to tell the truth from the false, and we're able to live in a more truthful way. And what we talk about in Recovery 2.0 is this path of discovery, that we're all on a path of discovery. And on the path of discovery, what we've come to this understanding that we're always changing, hopefully, that we're in a never-ending evolutionary process. And today, I might feel a certain way and understand things a certain way and see things a certain way, but tomorrow, I might see things slightly differently. And 5 years from now, I can almost guarantee you that there will be new things that I understand that I don't understand now. I'm hoping that's the case because that will mean I've been on this path of discovery and I get to continue to learn and to grow. So because you have wise presentations, mediocre presentations, and kind of poor presentations of the doctrine of the 12 steps, that's one place where we get into debate. I had a very wise presentation of the 12 steps. Somebody else, not so wise. And then there's another variable, which is us. When I first got sober in treatment, I understood things a certain kind of way, but it wasn't enough to keep me sober. I wasn't ready to adopt a lot of the teachings and a lot of the rituals that we do in recovery. I just wasn't ready to do it. I can't blame the program for that. I can't blame people for that. I can't even really blame myself. I can just simply say it was my responsibility to do certain things, but I didn't do them. I wasn't ready, and it's okay. I had to pay some prices. I had to become more humble. And when I did, I saw things differently, and I was able to access the teachings more profoundly for me in a way that changed me. Now, when I say the teachings, I want you to understand, I don't mean the 12 steps. I mean the universal teachings of truth which exist in every path. No matter what your religion is, no matter what your spirituality is, there are certain universal truths. Things like love, kindness. These are truths, right? These are energies that exist in the world, and we love them. We are attracted to them. Love and kindness and compassion. And when you connect with the teachings, like here's a teaching. For example, one teaching is one day at a time. Now, you might associate that with the 12 steps because people in the 12 steps talk about that and use that slogan. But that's a spiritual slogan that's existed for thousands of years. And the yogis in particular, and wise saints and sages from years past, understood this idea that human beings are on a one day at a time clock, that each day we have another opportunity to do it again. We wake up, we do our morning practice. We have to eat each day. We have to eliminate waste each day. Every day we have another opportunity to learn and to grow and to be present in this day. Very powerful spiritual concept. Yes, it's in the 12-step teachings, but if you're not into the 12 steps, you might still agree with the teaching there. So that's talking about the actual teaching of the 12 steps. And what I did in my book, Recovery 2.0, was to try to mine some of the goodness that's there in a way that would be non-offensive to someone who wasn't even into the 12 steps, or it would be accessible to anybody. Like, oh, let's look at this truth and let's unpack it. How does it feel to you? How does it work in your consciousness today? How's that working? Now, at this point in our conversation, it's very important to discuss the difference between the doctrine and the congregation. Okay, that's what we've been doing. But let's unpack it further. The doctrine of any teaching is, right, the written word or the spoken word, the core of the teaching. So you might say the core of 12-step teaching is found in the first book, which was the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Fine. If you approach that book with an open mind, you will recognize there's a really powerful thing there, and there's also a great challenge there. The powerful thing in this particular doctrine is that there are these truths threaded through there. There's also some very powerful processes, which, as I said at the beginning of this call, what a powerful thing for people to do, a personal inventory. I always thought that a personal inventory ought to be done by every woman and every young woman and every young man who graduate from high school or graduate from college. When you're you're moving forward in your life, that would be a gorgeous moment for some wise counselor or teacher to help you and guide you through a personal inventory. Can you imagine how good that would be for our children? If they got to do a really, and they were guided and helped through a process of non-dogmatic, let's just look at what's there, let's learn more about ourselves, that kind of process. Wow, incredibly beautiful. Well, that's part of the joy and the truth of what's in there. But the challenge is in there too. The challenge is in there too. And the challenge is language. The challenge is language. You know, one of the most ironic things, I often will watch two people online, or I'll hear two people have a debate about the 12 steps. One person very passionate about how positive it is, how wonderful it is. Another person, quite the opposite, super, like this is just, there's no science to it. It's all just mumbo jumbo. There's the success rates are so low, and you know, and these two people really going at it. But when I listen to their language, I understand that they're actually much closer to each other's perspective than they realize, but they're using different language, or the language of the program, the language of the doctrine, what's in that book is off-putting or confusing, or they haven't developed the perspective, or they haven't been invited to interpret the words in there in a way that works for them. Let me give you a specific example. The word God doesn't have to be offensive, but it calls up religious prejudice for people who have been traumatically hurt, or people who have had belief systems forced upon them under the name of religion, or the terrible pain and suffering and wars and all the terrible things that have happened under the name of God and religion. That's where that's coming from. But if you reinterpret that word in a way that works for you, even if you're an atheist and you just, whenever you see the word God, you just say higher self, or quantum physics, or the laws of physics, whatever works for you, there's an invitation there for you to make it work for you. You can interpret. Like, I remember when I got to treatment, the first thing I did, can you imagine, I got into treatment and they threw me right into my first 12-step meeting ever in my life. I was one day off of severe heroin, cocaine, alcohol. I was out of my mind. And here I am in this meeting. And at the end of the meeting, everybody stands up, holds hands, and starts reciting, of all things, the Lord's Prayer. I grew up Jewish. I've never recited the Lord's Prayer. I don't even know the words. And at that point in time, I raised my hand. After the Lord's Prayer was over, I raised my hand, and the counselor said, yes. And I said, I just got here and I don't think I'm in the right place. Everybody howled laughing. The whole room broke out laughing, collapsed in laughter. I had no way to interpret those words. Now, with a much more open mind, more understanding, much more open heart than I used to have, I can interpret any words. I can make any of those words work for me. I can find a thread to get into the teaching of what those words are saying. Now, if it says Father, and that upsets you because that's a male version of God, then just replace it with Mother, or Divine Mother, or Mother and Father. If it says, it talks about in the steps, powerlessness, if that upsets you, I break the word up into power and less, and then I move less before power. And so rather than powerless, I say I have less power than what is needed to solve this problem at this point in time. I'm not powerless over my whole life. Of course not, for me. But that's the way I do it. I'm looking at the words and I'm trying to figure out, okay, this is an exciting assignment. This is a puzzle. How can I take these words in this beautiful doctrine that's helped so many people, but these words don't really work for me? How can I make them work for me? Well, guess what? I found a teacher who could help me do that. I found a guide who could help me do that. And so I was actually able to go through and to find the teacher, the teaching in the doctrine in a way that worked for me, in the way that I was thinking at that time. That means somebody created access for me. Somebody created access for me. I had to have an open mind, but somebody was able to tell me, Tommy, you could approach this like this. Hey, let's take this word and let's really understand the meaning of that word. And so all of a sudden, I recognized, from then and now, I recognize we have a real problem with language. We have a real problem with language. And half the reason we're fighting, or half the reason there's a debate around the 12 steps or any other religion or spirituality or path to recovery, is because we're using words that mean one thing to us, but they mean a completely different thing to somebody else. Now that is interesting, because if we can start to look at words, we can start to play with words. We can have an openness and a playfulness around this, and the dogma falls away. And so somebody can come to you and say, all right, Tommy, I want to understand this thing, but I don't like the God thing. And I don't like the powerlessness thing. And by the way, I really don't feel like I'm powerless. You know, and by the way, I also don't like the idea that people in meetings are always forever for the rest of their life calling themselves an alcoholic or calling themselves an addict or calling themselves this or that. So what I've just done here in the last 30 seconds is I've named the 3 biggest problems that people cite, at least to me, when they have problems with the 12 steps. I can't stand the God thing. I don't like the concept of being powerlessness. And I don't like the language of I'm an addict and like I'm always going to be sick for the rest of my life. Well, guess what? I represent the middle. I'm really trying to represent the middle here. Okay, I had a positive experience around the 12 steps, fine. But I also understand the shortcomings there and the challenges that people have with 12-step programs, 12-step people, 12-step congregation, which we're going to come to in a minute. But in the middle perspective, I can tell you this. The word God is interchangeable with other words. The only thing that anyone needs is desire, willingness, and an ability to see the truth. If you have that and you can work with that, then you have the opportunity, in my opinion, you have the opportunity to move forward from where you are toward where you want to be. If you don't like the idea of powerlessness, it's not that you're powerless over your life. It's that when you're in active addiction, there is a feeling of, wow, this thing is bigger than me. I don't seem to be able to make a good choice here. Now, if you've never had that experience, that's okay. It's neither here nor there. But for those of us who have had that experience of, I feel out of control, that's a feeling of powerlessness. It doesn't mean you're powerless over your life. It just means that when I use drugs and alcohol, for me at least, I really enter this realm of obsessive thinking, compulsivity, and I can't make a good choice. And then I have to be removed from those substances for a period of time before the power of choice is restored and before I can start making some really good decisions in my life. So that's the power. So there's the God thing, can be interchanged with many, many words. The powerlessness thing needs to be unpacked and understood for people. And then the idea of always raising your hand and saying you're an addict. I don't do it. I don't do it myself. I don't raise my hand and say I'm an addict. I don't raise my hand and say I'm an alcoholic because I don't feel like I am that anymore. I don't mind if people do that, but I just don't, because for me, it's not my truth today. But I'm not in some, oh my God, this is the way you have to think. And, oh, if you don't see it my way, then, oh my God, I'm threatened, or, or, you know, you're going to be in trouble if you don't move forward to my way of thinking. You know, it's like, it's not like that. It's very simple. I've been given enough space by my teachers, and I've given myself enough space out of self-love to inquire within my own heart, to begin to make decisions based upon my heart, well, let's say my heart's desire. So I base decisions upon my heart's desire, and things tend to turn out pretty well. I used to say, my name's Tommy, I'm an addict, because at the time, that's what made sense for me. But the point here is language. We have a language problem. And so we must understand, as people in the 12-step world who are interested in the 12 steps and who are working the 12 steps and who have had a positive experience around the 12 steps, we must understand, we really must understand when people don't. We really have to understand them. Someone comes to me and says, God, I just can't stand the 12 steps. I just want to understand it. Tell me what aspects are hard for you, or, you know, and normally what I'm hearing from them is one of the three things I mentioned: the God thing, powerlessness, or raising your hand, never seeming to get better by always proclaiming yourself an addict. Or it will have to do with personalities that they encountered within 12-step programs. Now, I want to address a really touchy subject here, and that's women in recovery. Why this is touchy? Because I'm not a woman in recovery. But I want to address this, and I think it's very, very important. There's a young girl who reached out to me. I had suggested to her, she came to me and she asked for help. And I said, tell me what's going on. She said, well, I'm struggling around drinking, you know, and I can't stop drinking. And I said, well, have you tried 12-step programs? Have you tried Alcoholics Anonymous? And she said, no, I haven't tried it. I said, are you willing? She said, I am. Sure, I'll go. So she reported back to me, and she wrote me a really eloquent and amazing email. She said, I've been to 3 meetings. I live in a small town in the middle of this country. We have 1 meeting a week in my town. I went to 1 meeting in the town over also. In both meetings I went to, it was mostly men. They were mostly middle-aged or older, so I don't really relate to them in the first place. Almost everybody was smoking. I don't smoke. And almost everybody was drinking a lot of coffee. I don't really do that like that. And they were all hitting on me. And that kind of broke my heart. And so what that brings us to is a very, very important understanding of culture, a socialism and culture. See, that person, that girl, was exposed to an aspect, one aspect of that program, where in that town, in the meetings that she was going to, that's what was going on. And my heart breaks for that person and for anybody else and any woman who's ever had to deal with that shit. It's just unacceptable, and it's the worst of the worst. And we can talk about the 13th step and things that happen. But to take that incident and to say the entire thing is broken, or to say there's never been a positive effect for any woman in this program, that would obviously be an absurd conclusion based on that. However, we need to come up with a solution for that young woman who needs to deal with what she herself was referring to as her alcoholism. So I suggested online meetings. I suggested She Recovers. I suggested hip sobriety. I suggested all of the beautiful opportunities we have in our world today for women in recovery. Then there's another story. And the other story there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women friends that I have in 12 steps, in 12-step plan. And these women have had the most profound and positive experiences in meetings, both co-ed meetings and also women-only meetings. Extraordinary, profound changes for them. And so we look at the positive and we recognize that's an aspect of it as well. We look at the negative and we must accept that also is an aspect of this thing, and we must address it. We don't want to hide from it. We don't want to avoid the reality of it. These are very important things. But culture within an organization, for example, like Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous or Cocaine Anonymous or Adult Children of Alcoholics or Al-Anon or any of the other 200 12-step programs, the culture is going to change from city to city, town to town, state to state, country to country. People do things in different ways in different places. And so we want to be very mindful as we're moving into judgment. I don't mean judgment in the sense of, so there's judgment, which is discernment. Discernment. If you come up against, somebody who's taking advantage of you in a 12-step meeting, you can discern, this is not good for me. I'm going to stay away from that person. That's a really, really skillful discernment to make and a good decision. Another kind of judgment is more akin to condemnation. So we can make a judgment and make a discernment, like this is good for me, this is not good for me. And that's wonderful. But the condemnation of the organization as a whole, or I've had a negative experience with this person, therefore this entire thing sucks. There's nothing of value here. This whole thing is broken. It's just simply not true. We have to accept that there's good and there's bad in a society of this size, like there's good and bad everywhere in our world. Everywhere you go, good and bad. And we're going to have to understand that when we step into a 12-step meeting, we're stepping into an arena where people have been traumatized, where people are at various stages of recovery. And in the best situations, you're getting into these wonderful meetings where people have a really solid recovery, where there's a lot of love in the room, where there's a lot of service and care for each other in the room, and you can feel it. And that's just generally been my experience. And it's been the experience of many, 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 many millions of people over the last 80 years. Does it work all the time? Of course not. Is it right for everybody? Of course not. Is it a perfect system? Of course not. Are there things that could be improved about it? I believe so, but that's just my opinion. I'm speaking as somebody who had a really positive experience, but I'm also looking at it objectively. I want to understand how it could be improved. Why am I interested in that? Why is that even my business? Because my brothers and sisters are dying every day from alcoholism and addiction. Because I don't want to see anybody who's interested in healing not have a place to go. Because it breaks my heart into a billion pieces every time I see somebody fail at this thing. And by failing, I mean die from this thing because somebody wasn't there, or they didn't have an access point, or they didn't have a way in like I did. So this thing about women, it's not one way and it's not another way, it's every way. And again, as a man or a woman, we all must also take personal responsibility for our own decisions. And we have to do what we can. We have to discern what we can to move ourselves in the best way possible, to be around the greatest people possible, and to do what we can to support our own healing and our own becoming, if you will, our own growth, our personal development, our spiritual development. So coming down to the last few points here for this evening. Of course, there's not one way. The doctrine of the 12 steps is separate from the congregation around the doctrine. The congregation, as we've said, is human beings. They have every perspective, they have their history, they have their trauma, they have their wisdom, they have their pain, they have everything that human beings have. And they're putting their particular bent on the 12-step doctrine. My sponsor saw things a certain kind of way. Your sponsor or teacher will see things another way. And there's just a million examples. But what I do know is, on the bright side, is we have a system that does work for many people, and we have many other systems that also work for many people. That in this day and age, nobody has to be left out. There are opportunities to heal. There are opportunities to grow together. These days we have, oh my God, there's so many positive opportunities for us to move beyond addiction and truly thrive in recovery. It's not really about 12 steps or not 12 steps. But my advice to anyone, my offering, my invitation to anyone is, if you could look at addiction as just a way of seeing things that brings about pain, then what you're looking for is simply another way to see things that brings about joy. And if you're interested in that movement from perspective that leads to pain to perspective that leads to joy, you have really come to the right place. It's called recovery. And it's a vast universe. It's not perfect. It isn't good enough yet as far as I'm concerned, but it's there, and it's open. That's not just the 12 steps. It's there and it's open. And there's possibility and there's hope, and we have each other. And, you know, obviously I'm speaking from the yoga perspective when I say to you, if you bring yoga into your recovery, you're going to find that the truth in the doctrine of yoga that's threaded through the doctrine of yoga is also threaded through the doctrine of other forms of spirituality, is also threaded through the doctrine of the 12 steps. It's also threaded through the doctrine of psychology and atheism and agnosticism. Like, the truth is accessible by anyone. You just simply have to be willing to see your own life experience and to interpret it. And if you are fortunate enough to have a wise teacher to help you do that work, then you are blessed, 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 and blessed. Finally, I'll say this. There's so many people right this minute who are suffering in a terrible, terrible way, in ways that many of us have felt personally, and in ways even worse than we can imagine. And we all want the same thing for those people. Our job, our collective job, is to try to find the words and the tone and the delivery and the way of reaching those people when they ask for help. We have to find the right words to uplift them and to try to help them move beyond addiction by whatever path possible. And at the end of the day, there really is only one path, and that path is called love. And we all know it in our heart that love cures addiction. Love cures addiction. Satnam and love to you. I hope this was useful in some kind of way. Please, let's not argue with each other. Let's support each other. Let's uplift each other. And by every means possible, let's move beyond addiction and let's thrive in our lives. And when we have those tough days, let us not be pulled down into negativity. Let us not be pulled down into despair that, oh, recovery must not be working because I had such a crappy day today. On the contrary, you had a crappy day today because there was something more to learn. And if you set your mind for learning whatever it is, then those crappy days are going to be worth their weight in gold. Love you so much. Satnam. Have a great evening.